Imagine waking up to find that, instead of your usual inbox full of friendly reminders, you see an email instructing you to document last week's accomplishments in 5 bullet points, or prepare to exit the government stage permanently. Yes, that's exactly what more than 2 million federal workers experienced when a memo from an office linked to Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, landed in their inboxes last Saturday. Purportedly acting at the behest of the Trump administration, the message carried a clear threat: failure to respond will be taken as a resignation. It's not every day that bureaucratic management morphs into a high-stakes performance review or a voluntary firing squad, and if you're an economist, or even just an ordinary citizen with a pulse, you might wonder what kind of economic rationale underlies this madness. At first blush, proponents of this directive might boast about government efficiency. According to DOGE's own numbers, they claim to have saved up to $55 billion in federal spending. But a closer look at their website shows a saving of only $16.6 billion. Is this a masterstroke of fiscal responsibility or a smoke and mirrors attempt at distracting the public from harmful cuts? After all, when government employees are given one simple question, what did you get done this week? It hints at a simplistic, almost managerial approach to one of the most complex economic challenges, running a country. The economic ideology underlying such a tactic is straightforward on paper: reduce slack, trim the fat, and allocate scarce public resources more efficiently. Classical public choice theory would argue that every inefficiency in the public sector is economically costly, and streamlining operations should theoretically lead to enhanced output per federal dollar spent. But history, as always, is a stern teacher. Massive efficiency drives in both private and public sectors have repeatedly shown that reducing a workforce too aggressively can trigger unintended negative consequences. In the short run, such draconian measures may indeed deliver headline-grabbing savings, yet, in the long run, they can sow seeds of dysfunction, demoralized workers, and, paradoxically, even higher costs when essential services begin to fail. Let's talk about human capital, the bedrock of any productive economy. We economists have long stressed that workers are not just cogs in the bureaucratic machine, they are dynamic agents whose motivation, skills, and institutional memory translate into quality public service. When government personnel are forced into a corner, picking apart their weekly perfunctory activities in an email, the consequences can be severe. Consider the potential chilling effect: a climate of fear and insecurity may drive out the very talent that is necessary for effective public administration. A recent study by the National Bureau of Economic Research, NBR, indicates that overzealous monitoring and punitive performance metrics can decrease worker productivity by as much as 5% on average. Translate that to an entire federal workforce, and you risk not only a reduction in output but also an erosion of morale that can have cascading effects on the quality of public service. This is especially troubling when, as reported, even essential sectors like postal services and penitentiary systems face the risk of forced resignations. Critics argue that by simply sending an email, albeit one laden with subtle threats, the government is effectively placing the entire federal payroll on a high-wire act over the abyss of fiscal uncertainty. Let's pause here to examine the macroeconomic implications. The federal government is not merely an employer, it is a stabilizer in the broader economy. Federal workers contribute significantly to aggregate demand, especially in local economies where government salaries support small businesses, local services, and even real estate prices. A sudden, large-scale reduction in this payroll, as seen when roughly 75,000 federal employees took an offer to voluntarily resign under the fork-in-the-road proposal, can trigger a cascade of reduced consumer spending. Research by the Brookings Institution has shown that each dollar cut in discretionary government spending can reduce aggregate demand by up to $1.50 in the short run. In an environment that is already teetering on the edge of a recession, any further erosion of consumer spending could exacerbate the downturn. Further, the potential multiplier effect of reducing public employment goes beyond direct spending. A demoralized and diminished federal workforce may be less efficient, causing delays in essential services that support the private sector's functioning. In essence, what appears to be a cost-cutting move today could end up costing society dearly in the future. Beyond the economic concerns, this directive encapsulates a deeper political economic drama: the concentration of power in the hands of those unaccountable to the public. Under Trump's directive and Musk's questionable managerial bravado, a new paradigm of efficiency is emerging, one that bypasses traditional checks and balances. Musk's tweet praising the measure, and Trump's playful call for more aggression, hint at an authoritarian nanny state of a different sort. This is not the transparent bureaucratic oversight embedded in democratic institutions, it's a top-down management style that resonates more with tech startups than with centuries-old public administrations. Remember, though Musk's Doge may claim to operate with maximum transparency, a promise that feels more like corporate PR than sound public policy, the lack of due process surrounding these decisions poses serious constitutional and legal questions. Federal judge decisions and lawsuits by Democratic state attorneys general underscore a key point: public sector reform must be conducted within the rigorous limits of legal authority and respect for due process. Ignoring these parameters risks not only eroding public trust but also creating a governance model that might, in the long run, be as unstable as it is superficial. We are not living in a vacuum. History provides us with vivid examples of austerity measures gone wrong. Think of the European debt crisis seen in Greece and Spain, where severe spending cuts led to widespread economic collapse, skyrocketing unemployment, and even a social crisis. Those examples remind us that swift, uncompromising cost-cutting measures, particularly in the public sector, carry a dangerous risk. They may restore fiscal balances in theory, but they also shrink the economic multiplier, reduce consumer confidence, and sap the vitality of public services that millions depend upon. The current directive resembles a modern-day austerity gamble, one in which the taste for efficiency is undercut by a disregard for the critical investments in human and social capital. It appears to be a shortcut, a misguided attempt to plug fiscal holes by forcing resignations and sending a message that only measurable, bullet-pointed accomplishments matter. But, as any seasoned economist will tell you, not all outcomes can be linearly measured in bullet points. The intrinsic value of dedicated public service, the soft infrastructure of trust, and the stability of long-term governmental institutions cannot be reduced to a mere checklist. Let's bring in some of the hard data that bolsters these concerns. A recent survey conducted by the Government Accountability Office, GAO, found that over 60% of federal employees expressed worry about the increasing pressure to meet performance metrics at the expense of quality service delivery. Meanwhile, data from the Federal Reserve's latest employment report indicated that a reduction in government workforce size could lead to a 0.2% contraction in regional GDP across affected areas, as local spending suffers from reduced income levels. These numbers may seem small in isolation, but when multiplied across the vast federal apparatus, the aggregate impact can be substantial. Moreover, a comparative study published in the Journal of Public Administration demonstrated that organizations engaging in excessive employee surveillance often experience a decline in innovation and job satisfaction, with knock-on effects for productivity. After all, when workers are stifled by fear of abrupt dismissal, they are less likely to take the initiative, seek improvements, or even engage in constructive risk-taking, all of which are critical in a dynamic public service environment. This chilling effect is particularly concerning given the federal government's expanding role in modernizing technology and overseeing spending, as exemplified by the reorganization of the U.S. digital service into DOGE. The real-world ramifications of these policy maneuvers extend far beyond abstract figures and policy debates. The lives of everyday citizens are on the line. The directive isn't just about trimming payrolls, it's part of a broader strategy that has already seen mass dismissals of probationary employees and the rollback of vital programs. For instance, DOGE's reversal of cuts to a crucial health program for 9/11 first responders and survivors might be a small mercy amid an otherwise ruthless campaign to modernize the federal workforce. Likewise, the abrupt reinstatement of nuclear energy specialists by the Energy Department, after initially eliminating their jobs, underscores the potential chaos that can arise when cost-cutting is prioritized over expertise and service continuity. These examples highlight a critical truth: efficiency measures that are implemented without careful, context-rich planning can cripple essential services. The irony is palpable: a department founded on the intention of increasing transparency and cutting costs ends up sparking widespread legal challenges and internal upheavals. This is not just a bureaucratic hiccup, it's a cautionary tale about the dangers of conflating cost-cutting with genuine improvement. When vital public services are at stake, even modest disruptions can compound into significant economic damage, adversely affecting community welfare and, ultimately, the nation's economic stability. At its core, this saga is a microcosm of a larger ideological debate: should government strive for corporate-style efficiency at any cost, or should policymakers preserve the intricate balance between fiscal austerity and the sustained investment in human capital and public trust? The directive, backed by the dubious alliance of an unelected billionaire and a populist administration, tips the scales toward the former, with potentially disastrous long-term consequences. Economic theory tells us that government, as an employer, serves dual roles. Not only does it provide necessary services, but it also acts as a stabilizing force in downturns. During economic recessions, for instance, public employment acts as an automatic stabilizer that helps offset private sector job losses. Removing or demoralizing these workers not only undermines service delivery but also weakens one of the most effective countercyclical buffers against economic shocks. Now, let's not beat around the bush. In true boss economics world fashion, the whole episode has all the makings of a farce, a gilded parody of modern governance. One can almost imagine Elon Musk, with a smirk, firing off a quick text message: "What did you get done this week?" only to watch the ensuing panic among hundreds of thousands of feds. It's a spectacle where high-tech management meets traditional government, but without the necessary checks and balances. The result? A comedy of errors that has real economic consequences. Critics, including union leaders who rightly accuse this tactic of being cruel and disrespectful, warn that such policies will only lead to a culture of fear, lower productivity, and, in the end, a government that is less capable of performing its essential duties. When the sentiment among federal workers shifts from one of duty and service to one of resentment and insecurity, the economy suffers. Bureaucracies are not factories with simple assembly line outputs, they are intricate human networks where trust, institutional memory, and expertise are the true currencies of productivity. Looking at the latest economic data lends further weight to these concerns. For instance, an analysis by the International Monetary Fund, IMF, from Q3 2023 highlighted that public sector workforce instability can lead to a reduction in regional GDP growth rates by up to 0.3% in areas heavily dependent on government spending. Additionally, consumer sentiment indices published by the Conference Board suggest that any uncertainty surrounding job security, especially among public employees, has a compounded negative effect on overall economic confidence. These macroeconomic trends correlate disturbingly well with the current administration's aggressive cost-cutting tactics. Similarly, a recent report by the Economic Policy Institute, EPI, noted that while reducing bloated bureaucracies can theoretically improve fiscal health, the hasty execution of such policies without sufficient safeguards often leads to increased long-term costs. The EPI warns that the loss of institutional knowledge and the disruption in service delivery can end up hampering economic growth, a classic case of saving a few dollars today only to pay a much higher price tomorrow. So, what is the solution? While fiscal responsibility and efficiency are undeniably important, the current approach is as crude as it is counterproductive. A more responsible reform strategy would incorporate several key elements. 1. Gradualism and consultation. Instead of unilateral edicts backed by vague threats, policy reforms should involve gradual transitions with ample consultation from experts, unions, and the affected workforce. Incremental adjustments allow for the management of transition costs and the maintenance of service quality. 2. Holistic performance metrics. Relying on a simplistic, one question per week metric cannot capture the complex contributions of federal employees. A balanced approach must include qualitative assessments, peer reviews, and robust data analytics to ensure that efficiency improvements do not come at the expense of public service quality. 3. Safeguards against unintended consequences. Any cost-cutting strategy must incorporate measures to mitigate potential negative spillover effects on local economies and essential services. This includes maintaining a safety net for those in critical roles, especially in sectors that form the backbone of community infrastructure. 4. Institutional reform, not carnage. Finally, the push for efficiency needs to be reframed from a war on bureaucracy to an investment in modern management practices that respect the human element of public service. It is possible to harness the benefits of technology, streamline processes, and performance monitoring without resorting to punitive tactics that alienate a dedicated workforce. In closing, the recent directive demanding federal workers to justify their weekly productivity is much more than an administrative memo, it's a harbinger of a shifting governance paradigm that blurs the lines between corporate efficiency and public service. While saving billions of dollars sounds attractive on the surface, the short-term fiscal gains must be weighed against the long-term risks of demoralizing the workforce, disrupting essential services, and ultimately fueling an economic downturn. Elon Musk's and the Trump administration's flirtation with a new, aggressive model of government operation might seem audacious, even revolutionary, to some. But when the reforms are executed in a manner that feels more like an HR memo from a Silicon Valley startup than a carefully calibrated public policy, the consequences can be dire. The cancellation of long-held benefits, mass dismissals, and the weaponization of performance metrics could very well turn the federal workforce into a fragmented, inefficient crew, barely able to keep the lights on during the next downturn. For both ordinary citizens and financial professionals watching these developments, the lesson is clear: efficient governance is not achieved by fire-and-forget mandates but through thoughtful, measured, and inclusive reforms that safeguard the invaluable human capital at the heart of public service. As the public eye sharpens its focus on these maneuvers, it becomes increasingly critical for policymakers to remember that in the realm of economic development, short-term gains must never undermine long-term stability. The bottom line is this: in the economy of ideas, the latest batch of emails represents not a breakthrough in fiscal management, but a high-stakes gamble that could backfire spectacularly, turning an already fragile economic landscape into a chaotic free-for-all. The promise of efficiency remains enticing, but let's not lose sight of the fact that true progress depends on respect for human capital, institutional safeguards, and policy reforms that are as wise as they are bold. Stay tuned, because if our federal workforce isn't getting the support it needs, the economic recession might tighten its grip even earlier than expected. And that, my friends, is a headline we'd all rather avoid.